Alrighty, everybody, welcome along to the Laser Sports Academy podcast. It's so great to have you back after a couple of weeks away. I'm very happy to have a good friend of ours of the channel, Nickel, joining us, the Zone 3 Canberra side op, all-round excellent dude and everybody's favourite commentator these days. How you going, Nickel?
That's what they're saying.
I'm doing really well. I am far better than I was even just a handful of days when we did our lovely bottom 10 podcast where I could hardly breathe. So I'm glad to be able to breathe today. So no, I'm doing good.
We're glad you can breathe too, mate. Keep breathing. And somebody else who would like to keep breathing, Mr. Holmes, welcome along.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Everybody knows Holmes as co-founder of the Laser Sports Academy and all things that we do. And it's great to have you on the podcast for the first time, my friend. I think it's the first time, isn't it?
We did a cheeky little 30-minute one with Mad Kens once about the team cap system, but I don't know if we technically made that a podcast or if that was just like an interview, you know?
I think they're all blending into each other these days. But anyway, mate, great to have you on for a great topic. So the topic tonight we're going to be talking about is the future of state-based comps. So just to frame all this up, if you are an international viewer, this is a fairly Australasian-centric topic to be discussing. We hope you would still get value out of it because it's got lots of juicy bits in there. But just to pre-warn you about that. Really the discussion has been had by a few people around the community over the last couple of years. And we thought, Nicola and I was discussing it probably a year ago and also at Nats. And we thought, you know what, we need to do a podcast on this. Let's have a good old public chat on this topic. I think people would love to hear about it. So here we are. So... essentially what's, just to frame up our convo before we start getting into the big questions, by state-based comps, what we're kind of referring to is all the invitational tournaments that might happen at a local level around the place that aren't pre-nats or Zeltac, essentially. So examples include the New Zealand Invitational, what they've done. A few years ago, we did a Rumble, and there's been some other sites in Canberra. You guys recently had an invitational tournament that ran over a long weekend, I think, Nickel?
No, it wasn't quite an invitational. Originally it was just a kind of extended training session to the wider New South Wales, and then it got the second one became a bit of an open invitation to other teams. We ended up having obviously Queensland come down, and we had Tasmanian teams come up, and became just a one-night event. Went very late, but just one night. But everyone wanted more, so hence why we're having this conversation.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there is more too, because I heard it was an awesome comp. We need to get down to Canberra more because 2013 was a long time ago. So why are we discussing this? Do you want to take this, Nickel? Do you want to tell our audience why the hell is this topic even important for people to think about?
I think the big sort of like, broad brushstrokes of this is we've got one of the largest, as a country, one of the largest scenes in the world as far as laser tag goes, and it's almost outgrowing the current crop of competitions, which primarily is Zeltac. Obviously, we've had a few, and obviously the pre-nats have added, competitions into the annual calendar. But with so many players. You guys mentioned team caps earlier, but that's obviously part of it. We probably need to get to the point where we're actually offering more avenues through across the country to players for competitive laser tag experiences beyond just league. That's the crux of it. How we get there is obviously up for discussion and what we're going to discuss here today. But also the future of competitive laser tag beyond just where the competition is or who runs the competition actually relies on more competitions happening, so we get to see different formats. We don't have the luxury necessarily of being on a continent where there's 5, 10 different countries all doing a slightly different version and we can take a bus or a train or a car there. We play a fairly standard structure and have done now for the better part of the last 15 years. That only changes with people having an introduction to other formats of the game, tweaked in small ways or in large ways. I think that's it. That's a bit of ramble on that one, but that's the crux of it. That's why we need to kind of start talking about this now as a community.
There's something I'll add as well that I should have added before referring to Nickel. For anybody out there who isn't overly familiar with how tournaments work in Australia or overseas, in Australia, where we have like one tournament to rule them all, which is the Zeltag Zone Laser Tag Australasian Championships, which for the last 20 years has been the one that everybody is building up towards during the year to go to generally in Australia. Whereas if you travel to Europe or US, you don't get that. You get a lot of like in Europe, for example, you've got the Finland Nationals, you've got the Sweden Nationals, they've got the European Championships, they've now got the German Nationals. So there's a whole bunch of tournaments that they all travel around to. And I'm not sure that any one of those tournaments is considered like as higher above all the other tournaments like Zeltag is in Australia, if that makes sense. And similarly in the US, they've got they do have national titles, but they also have they have tournaments at Fort Wayne all the time, and they have sites where they regularly travel to do tournaments. And so when I first spoke to Slick like 10, 15 years ago when I first met him, he's like, oh, yeah, I've got over 100 titles from all these different tournaments. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you even get 100 titles? Like, how is that possible? And then I realized after a while, that's how they might go to 7 tournaments a year in the US. At that time, they were traveling around to different places. So it's funny because we're having a conversation about, Australia at the moment has a very successful and large tournament. And we're talking about the future of state-based competitions as being a way of evolving our scene, which seems a little bit counterintuitive. But yeah, we're here to make some cases that might be the case for us, and also talk about what some of the risks are associated with that, and other factors that come into play. So, do you have anything you'd like to add, Holmes, before we start kicking off into the big questions?
Nah. I just think just to carry on a bit from what Nickel was saying, is the Zoltak has obviously become like it's a premium product that we've played for so many years now. It's gotten to the point where we, when you go to Zoltak, there's certain things that you kind of expect in terms of, obviously like all the effort and like a massive volunteer team, better and better production value in like the media team and stuff every year, but also things like it's going to be 2 shots per second for the teams. It's going to be no trigger lockout on the Helios systems at least. And it's going to go like a round robin, Cascade 1, Cascade 2 finals, which I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. But I think also it being this big, tournament to rule them all, as Bootza was saying, it makes it very difficult to make even small changes, but even like especially significant changes without, everyone being like, oh, I come to Zoltak for this and I've gotten, X and I've gotten Y. So I think the state-based competition provides like the perfect platform for trialing out different stuff, just to throw a few out there, like 1 shot per second stuns, playing with trigger lockout, playing like how the Rumble did, how they played with the pooling system instead of, what we've traditionally done. And I think all of these things are for the betterment of the sport, and trying to push this thing to become like a more than what it is now. So that's all I have to say right now.
When we were at Nats, I was talking to Bambi about Bambi is from Sweden, and I was saying, oh yeah, there is a growing group of players that really enjoy 1 shot per second and stuns in Australia, and he's like, why don't you change it? And I'm like, oh yeah.
If it was only that easy.
It's like turning the Titanic, mate. You might start turning the steering wheel, and 10 years down the track, something might happen. But it's essentially like what that was a real reflection of the advantage of like the tournaments they have in Europe, which might be smaller. They're much more nimble in that they can change things from year to year, and the player base is less attached to whatever the old way was of doing it. Whereas in Australia, I can remember when we had to bring in covering in 2000, no covering in 2010, and how much that was a massive change to bring that in. It took like 2 years to like fully get it over the line, and several of top players on the committee having to really get it through. Like, it took quite an effort. So, totally see what you're saying there, Holmes, about the ability to try things with these state-based comps. So let's kick off there. Let's talk about some of the things that we can do in state-based comps, or some of the advantages that state-based comps can bring that we currently are having trouble unlocking at Zeltac.
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to start.
Nick wants to start. You can't have them all. You got to give us something to talk about. No. We don't premise this by saying we're all at Zeltac. We love Zeltac. It's amazing. We never want to Zeltac is such an important piece of our scene, and we never want to compromise it in any way. What we're doing here is complementing it with some other tournaments.
And I think that's just it. I think that's actually probably the best place to start, is that these competitions, one of the things they give us, and what we can try with them, is there's a lower barrier to entry, especially initially. They're often smaller in scale, so they might be a single day, or they might be a night, they might be a long weekend, and things like that. And we'll probably talk about that in some of the problems with them. Towards the back end, I think we've got some questions around like what are the struggles or the problems that we face with it, because there are some, and Bootza, I know you can speak to this as a site op and myself, and so we can sort of put that perspective out to the community as well. It's something they may not always get, but you can have, they're slightly less, at least initially, they're slightly less intense. They're less premium. They don't cost quite literally thousands of dollars to get to and go to, unless, of course, you live in Western Australia and have to fly across the country. And because of that, though, we get to expose more people to compare, like, proper, like, structured competition rather than just league, which is still good. Don't get me wrong; it's the basis of it. But I think that's probably the biggest. That's one big thing. Like big thing we can do, and that can only be good. Like, surely, I will challenge anybody to argue that is not a good thing for the sport.
I think there's we've all got those players that are maybe not quite ready to go to Nats yet, but they're keen. And there's something about exposing them to that level, and then them seeing that there's, oh my gosh, there's so many more good players that aren't just from my site. There's a whole world out there, but also like the social aspect of traveling with people as well. Firstly, if they're younger, it's going to be much easier to get either permission from parents or the parents to come down with them, or come, to the venue for a couple of days, rather than trying to get them to go for a whole 2 weeks. So I just sort of reduces the amount of things that are keeping younger players from participating in the level, really, isn't it?
And I think so in South Australia, with the South Australian Laser Sports Association, one of the projects we've kind of got from going tail end of 2023 into 2024 is to start up that's a South Australian Premier League, if you will. Thank you, Queensland. Something along those lines. And my one of the main points I always make when I'm talking about like why we need to start doing it is it just provides that next level in between going to the grand zone laser tag Australasian Championships versus just training like with people at your local league. If you look at any other traditional sport that's been around for a while, say basketball, you start off playing basketball, just social basketball. You go with a bunch of mates, make a team. If you were kids and maybe like one of the dads just like coaches the team, he probably doesn't even play basketball, maybe never even played basketball, but he's just going to coach the team, whatever. And that's a really good grassroots entry level, But then imagine those kids going straight from that to like, I don't follow basketball, whatever, the national big, the thing that any basketball player that wants to go pro is aiming for in Australia, right? Like it makes doesn't really make sense, right? And that's something that we're missing in laser tag. You would go from social basketball, then you'll play club basketball, and then you might play like state versus state basketball, and then eventually you get to, you know, the big leagues and stuff. But there's so many different stages that predicate that. And so, yeah, that's kind of from a just providing a proper pathway to get to nationals. That was one of the big things that stood out to me. And then also competitions just provide a not everyone is as good at like self-directing like their training and stuff, and like being like, okay, this is the skill set that I need to work on, whatever. Not everyone is very good at that naturally, but going to a tournament is a very great way at kind of like lensing it for you, making it here. Like, here's the thing, like, oh, in the last few games, I like, you know, really didn't do very well in these situations. And just because of like the you're in a tournament, I think you kind of retain that a little bit better, and then it makes it easier to then go back into training and then fix up those areas. So I always say the difference between a player before their first nationals and after their first nationals is like crazy, but I think we can achieve that, probably not to the same extent, but some level of that in state bet competitions. And I think that's a lot of why Queensland actually, like when you see like the Queensland rookie, like isn't the same as anyone else's rookie, because you've got your formerly North versus South, now Queensland Premier League. You have that second level of tournament between going to pre-nats and nationals and your leagues and just training. Yeah.
On that note, I think, and I'm sorry, Bootza, I know you were about to jump in before. Do you want to jump in? And I've got after that.
I saw the finger, mate. That was a good sign for me to step back for a little bit.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go?
No, go, please.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of point out, and this is going to be for a lot of our viewers that watch this from all over Australia, right? One of the things these competitions also do, and this is something that we've seen in the last couple of years since I took over my site, and it's been well received, is for areas that have smaller scenes. You guys are both very lucky. You have quite big player bases in both of your areas. Canberra doesn't. It's getting there, but it didn't when I took over. We had 12 people maybe on average, and it's worse out of Code Red or the New South Wales sites in general have a fairly low player base, which means these sorts of competitions give a far more manageable entryway into a scene that's beyond just your own, which is limited by the number of players you might have. And the reaction we've had from the New South Wales guys doing their qualifier comps out of the ACT site, but also just those little one-night ones, seems to be indicative that there's a desire for that. There's a desire to have that larger community, which I'm going to say the first controversial thing of the night, possibly. If you don't have a site op that cares enough, or you're entirely reliant on a local committee which is limited by the fact that they are not the site op. They may not have the same sort of pull as a site op to be able to offer things, right? Those communities are going to struggle to grow. This gives you a way to kind of do it, and also a way to kind of prove to a site op that maybe not a player site op, that things exist outside and there's benefit in doing it. So it's cyclical in that sense. Well, I think we'll come back to site ops later.
I'd not actually considered that before, actually, but I love that. So it becomes more for a smaller site or region, having a state-based comp provides an aspirational aspect to the local players to motivate them to build their scene up. So then when you have those conversations about, okay, make the new players feel welcome, try not to have too many clicks, make sure make sure the social circle's pretty open. All those conversations are much easier to have once they've actually been exposed to a slightly higher level of comp and kind of seen the bigger picture, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. I did want to say something before. Now it's left me. The point you brought up about the next level up thing, Holmes. I think when you were saying that, I was just reflecting on what makes a finals game at Zeltac different to a league game on Tuesday night at a local level, right? Like they're both the same, technically the same settings, same format. You might even be playing the same players in there, right? But the difference is the moment, right? It's the event, the pressure. Everything's different because there's, you might be getting streams, so people are watching. These results are going to go down on Doug's website for the rest of eternity. Like there's these things, the thing matters much more, right? Which I think is another great thing about having that next level beyond league, is because it exposes people to that, essentially, even if it's just the southeast, the Adelaide, South Adelaide, QPL or whatever it was going to be called, Premier League. I don't know, that thing. Nice. Doesn't matter what it is, but it's the same. That new player is having that experience. It's not, doesn't have to be Zeltac. It just has to be a higher level than what they're used to, essentially. And they're getting the experience of going through, and there's greater pressure, and they've got to deal with nerves. And then when the results happen, people cheer because it's like it matters so much more. So, from that perspective, definitely having the state-based comps for some regions are going to be there. Going to be another opportunity to do that more than just once a year at Zeltac, essentially. Is there any other advantages you guys can want to rattle off now, or do we want to just let them sort of organically pop out of your mouth as we keep answering more questions?
I think Holmes already said it, and I think we're going to come back to it probably a few more times, which is the ability to try things. It's a 2-day comp. And I was going to say something at the when Holmes, you were describing this at the start. Triples at Zeltac tournaments. Now, we can argue over whether or not there's too many side events at Zeltac tournaments, and that makes it too big. That's a different story. But triples has kind of been codified into this thing that changes every year. And we're all used to that. And we talk about that flexibility to change that the Europeans have that we don't, right? That change, what are some of the things that we would like to change? And maybe we get to that a little bit later as we say, what would we do to push the sport forward? I imagine some of us would change a few things within the game. And we can note that all down. And for anybody listening who wants to put on a one-day tournament, hey, have at it. Don't let us be the ones to influence the change. Anybody who runs a tournament, be it a social league, be it a one-day comp, be it a midnight to dawn comp, that would be nuts on the body. Maybe I'm just getting old. But yeah, so I think that's something we'll keep coming back to as something that anything outside of Zeltac has a little bit more ability to do so, unless it's, of course, the triples hit.
Mm. Well, yeah, following on from that as well, like I see a huge opportunity. So we'll probably talk about it a little bit more later, what a calendar might look like, an Australasian state-based comp calendar. We could have a quick look at that. We'll have a look at it. But if we were to find something like that worked, there's no reason to say that each of the state-based comps couldn't be unique in some way. And that would be what I'd be encouraging as well. A little bit of a spoiler alert. If we do bring back the Rumble, it's probably going to be somewhere close to Worlds or European settings. And the reason for that is that I feel like there's a growing desire to play it in our country, continent. And there's currently no big tournament where you can actually compete doing it. And I feel like it'd be a great way to get people to Queensland. I feel like we're in a good position to have a state-based comp if we were to have one every year or two. And that would be a reason that people would come, is because it's unique to everything else, essentially. So, and there's other things like I think I might have mentioned to you, Holmes, like, Adelaide. Everyone knows Adelaide's got a pretty small arena. Not sure if it's going to be able to handle like 3-5, a big comp, but you could have a side event comp there, right? So a side event comp would be a perfect way for all the players from all over the country who have always wanted to play with each other to actually mix it up and play on different teams and do doubles and triples and that kind of a thing, or triples a limb or whatever. But you could literally run a series of side event comps where people could mix up, and that would be a uniqueness that we only ever do in Adelaide, essentially. So that's what I like about the idea as well, is that we could potentially give ourselves the opportunity to play more different styles, or even just the way we run the competition, like whether it's using pooling or something like that. It might be, okay, when we go to this comp, we do it this way, and I really love it that way, so I always go to this comp. And New Zealand have their own thing that they do with the way they grade all the players, and you end up with like a mixed team, but all the teams are balanced based upon their grading system. And
they have a 23-point maximum, I believe, and then each of the grades are assigned a different point value, so you can't end up with, 4 or 5 of the best grade players. You're like kind of forced to mix it up. So it's an interesting take. And I believe also on the topic, they do play with 1 shot per second stuns, if I'm not mistaken, at invites.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, and everybody I've spoken to who's been invites has said it's like one of the best comps they've played. Like all the Tassies that went over there for the most recent one, they loved it. They had the best time. So, that's a big advantage that I think would come out of doing them as well.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, so should we move on? What do you guys think would be? Let's move on to this calendar idea. What do you guys think would be the maximum number of events we could have each year to sustain everything? Because I guess to look a little bit into the future to possible disadvantages, the last thing we ever want to do is have a negative impact on Zeltac. Because I think that although, yes, there are some challenges with it, I think one of the biggest strengths we have as a community in Australia is that we have Zeltac. We have the holy grail of tournaments, and we get a huge attendance to it. And we've got, it's proven itself. We get people that have been playing bloody 20 years. I mean, yeah. And the average number of attendances at Zeltac is pretty high. Like, it's for an event where there's 200 people go. I don't know what the number is, but there's a lot of people that have been to 5 or more Zeltacs. A lot of people. So yeah, how do we create a state-based system and sustain everything? What do you think the maximum number of times per year people would be willing to do something?
You want to start, Holmes?
Put a number on it, Holmes.
I'll let Nickel cook for a little bit longer. I see he's ruminated on that. But I think honestly, every time I hear about obviously we do have currently, there are a few smaller tournaments that we can go to outside of Zeltac and Preenuts, right? Like there is like these occasional New South Wales tournaments. Back in the day, like Werribee used to do, like a 1-night, 2-night tournament. I've been to a couple of those, and they were always really fun. Invites, whatever. But I think there a massive hurdle for a lot of people is just like the finances of that. And like as you were saying, Bootza, you kind of, if it's a choice between am I going to go to Zeltac or am I going to go to this weekend, like relatively less important tournament, most people are going to choose Zeltac. So I think for a lot of people, it's the more than anything, it's just the money side of things, right? But and you could, if you've got someone that's got FU money, they could probably compete once a month, whatever. I absolutely would. I would go to every single tournament ever in the world if I had FU money, which I don't. So yeah, I guess that's always the first thing I think of when I think, oh, I'd like to go to one of those tournaments. It's like, oh, well, time off work. I'm only a casual Big W worker on an average 11 hours a week. I don't know if I can manage that. Maybe if I live on baked beans for a bit, but yeah, that's always just the first thing that comes to my own mind. But
I think point out that even if you have got a lot of money, there's the flip side to that is the commitment, obviously time off work, things like that, especially if these tournaments end up going a couple of days, Friday, Saturdays. And because there's a balancing act for any site that runs tournaments for weekends. It's a financial aspect to it. whether or not you can actually do it. I think there's no way to have this conversation without, unfortunately, bringing up two things that, and I know, like, again, this isn't on Zeltac, but as a community, which includes Zeltac, I think there's two things that have to be brought up that I don't think we get away from, because it's a big part. Because you're right, Zeltac tournaments, obviously, that's your premier spot. And the pre-nats have become such a staple of that. But there's 3 of them. It's a lot of pre-nats, right? And as a community, we don't want to step on the toes of the person who's running nationals for the year. But at 3 pre-nats spread over the course of 4 months before nationals, 4 or 5 months, you're starting to introduce a lot, you're condensing down a lot of competitions into a relatively short time frame, right? That people are going to want to go to because they want to go play on the maze and things like that. There's reasons why you want to go to pre-nats. So the unfortunate question there is, I think if you fill the calendar up, does filling the calendar up remove a pre-nats from the calendar, or 2 pre-nats from the calendar, even? So, no, I think that's a legitimate question, though, because it's going to be problematic, because you can have a lot of people wanting to go to pre-nats. Site-ops are sold on the idea that you can run multiple pre-nats and you make lots of money off them, relatively speaking. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of it, because it is a fairly big impost on a business to go shut down for 2 weeks, right, at one point. The other side of things that I think we have to talk about, or have to be at least conscious of, is Nationals is changing its dates at the moment, which I'm completely for, but it's shifting its dates back to an older setting, which, from pre-COVID time, which is about a March or a February-March thing. And now that starts to introduce, obviously, a slightly different timing of when competitions can be run. So if we're going to speculate today, and I'm keen to, and let's fill a calendar out with competitions, are we filling it out post the move to March, or are we filling it out now? Because with it being in June this year, next year, it's not 2024 yet. June next year, May, I think, the year afterwards, I think, has been the suggestion. I'm going to get that wrong. I'm sure someone will point out when this is posted that Nick got it wrong there. And then hopefully March. I'm hoping it's March. I will take it when it's in March.
Yeah, I think it is hard, because obviously by trying to bring nationals closer and closer to March, it makes it less than a 12-month turnaround between nationals. Like, I believe the turnaround between 2023 and 2024 will be like 10 months.
Yeah.
Which makes it super hard to squeeze anything else in there, especially if you're a player. I think specifically for the super competitive players at Zoltac that want to get the best result properly, the best result they can, they're very much incentivized to go to as many of the pre-nats as possible, right?
Yeah.
So, it does get pretty difficult.
Yeah, we got Worlds as well next year. So next year's a tricky year to have this discussion, and I certainly don't have the answers for those questions, Nickel. When I asked the question to myself, I'm in the world of, we're already got Nats in March. Then how do we figure it out? If that makes sense.
And I think that's fine to play. And we sit here as a community and go, cool, if you want to run a tournament in the next couple of years, it's going to be a bit hodgepodge, in the sense that I don't think we're going to find ourselves landing tournaments in the next couple of years that are going to become a staple in the cycle. They might get lucky. What I suspect we'll see is the willingness for sites over the next couple of years, the willingness of sites to have a crack at it. And to answer the original question, I'd love to see something around... I'd like to see half a dozen premier-style 2-day events through the year. Half a dozen to maybe 8, so 6 to 8, and that's probably inclusive of pre-nats, unfortunately, which is why I raised the question of maybe pre-nats needs to be dropped to 2 pre-nats, or maybe even 1 pre-nats. So you have, you know, a series of competitions elsewhere, and we don't feel like we're having to creep around each other or put up directly against another competition, because that's really rough. And it's probably going to happen initially, but it's probably the fastest way that we end up getting sort of effectively competing cliques within the community, which is like, no, in my opinion, not the way we should be approaching it.
I think on that point, wasn't it initially we only did 2 pre-nats, but the first time we did 3 was for Bendigo 2015, because pre-nats 1 and 2 they had Nexus, and pre-nats 3 they did a pre-nats 3 because they got H Pro.
I think
originally there was the very first pre-nats was run in 2009 at Sunshine Coast, and it was literally almost like a meme. Really, we couldn't come up with a name for the tournament, so we called it pre-nats. And the only reason we held it is because there was a whole bunch of us about to go to Worlds in Finland, and we all wanted a chance to play on a team together against other people. So we created this tournament called Pre-Nats, and we held it right before Sunny Coast Nats in whenever it was, May or whatever. And then it just kind of stuck. Like, everybody was like, oh, this is a good idea. We get to come and train. And yeah, I think it was a maximum of 2 Pre-Nats right up till Bendigo. And yeah, I've been pretty vocal on the, do we really need Pre-Nats 1 thing for a while? And because I've after running the 2016, I'm not sure, did we do 3 Pre-Nats that year? I think we did.
I think we've done 3 pre-nats every year that I've been playing from memory. Actually, 2016 we might not have.
Might have
and
done
then afterwards we went back to 3.
Yeah. I really feel like 2 is necessary, because the first one is the one where people come in and find all the shots that you didn't know were in your own arena, and like you get all the top quality teams in there, and they all like lock the, you know, they just play differently when you've got 3 really, really high quality teams in there playing for a big prize. They, you know, you really see how the arena's holding up and whether you need to make subtle adjustments to the arena and to the bases. And then the third one, obviously you've made the changes, you lock it in, and it's kind of like a final test one. But the first one I always found like, do we really need this one? And the attendances have been pretty average for many of them as well. Like some of them have had very low attendances. So yeah, I kind of feel like that's an event that is potentially a spot where another state-based comp could sit. And I don't think the site operators make a great deal of money out of it because it's not that heavily attended. But I am happy that people would love to disagree with me on that point, because I'm sure not everybody agrees that Pre-Nats 1 is unnecessary. Yes.
I think it goes to another comment. I think we may have talked about it a year ago, which is, and Holmes, I think we may have talked about it as well. Maybe at Nationals. Maybe it was Bootza, another conversation with Bootza, which is how do we change the game and how we develop it, and whether or not giving everybody such a clear-cut look at the maze before Nationals for such a long period of time, is that actually beneficial? Wouldn't it be fun if we all rocked up to a maze that no one had ever seen before for Nationals? Now,
including the home site?
Including the home site. Completely Zeltac run competitions, completely brand new maze. I love the concept. Now, I fully acknowledge that there's huge numbers of problems with that, especially given your commentary on the pre-nats too often is where you get to see all the things you didn't realize could be done in your own maze because, the blindness you get to familiarity in your own maze. So I get that. But I feel that's a pretty good argument to drop the first of the pre-nats and then replace it with another competitive event that people can go to so they can still play in their teams. I imagine that what you'll end up seeing is if you had a good roster of competitive formats, which are at least 5-man formats, you'll probably get Nats teams going to other tournaments to play against players. They still get to train together. They still get to play competitive laser tag together and against hopefully other high-end competitive teams. And some teams won't be as high-end because they'll be playing around with different humans because they can, and it's not Zeltac, so things like that. But just because we remove one doesn't necessarily mean that we lose the competitive training for those ultra competitive teams. And in fact, in some cases, you might actually be adding more to them, because going to 3 pre-nats is expensive. Going back to Holmes' point, that the burden from an expense point of view is huge. But if you knew you had I'm going to use Hobart as an example because it was one of the furthest to travel for, and obviously, therefore, it costs more. For New South Wales teams, if there's a competition in the ACT or New South Wales, it's a hell of a lot cheaper, right? Even for Queensland to come down to a New South Wales competition versus going to Hobart, it's hugely cheaper. So get to 2 local competitions rather than 1 pre-nats.
I think also, funnily enough, a lot of the time with pre-nats 1, since I've been playing in my first pre-nats was in 2014 for Bendigo. Even from that competitive aspect, a lot of the times pre-nats 1, the experience of pre-nats 1 in terms of what the arena's like, and then in some cases the equipment is nothing like how it ends up being. And so it's almost like, obviously, it's good for the purposes of just being able to play with your team and working on general cohesion and stuff, and also good for the site and the arena to try and like improve upon and stuff. But from that, strictly, I'm going to pre-nats to get as much practice as I can for nationals. Pre-nats 1 ends up being like the least relevant one, because after pre-nats 1, they'll make a bunch of arena changes. In the case of what happened in Bendigo back in 2014, we played 2 pre-natses that were on Nexus, and then suddenly, and they were in the bases were completely different. I believe pre-nats 1, all 3 of the bases were completely different. Pre-nats 2, red was still the same, and the other 2 were different. And then pre-nats 3, it's on a different system, and it was all the bases were this new base, right? Going into Albury this year as well, it's a little on the fence whether they're even going to have Helios 2 or not for this tournament, right? So even if the arena stays completely the same, the way the arena would play on Helios 2 versus on Nexus, which Nexus with trigger lockout versus Helios 2 with no trigger lockout, there's a bunch of things there. It's going to be drastically different. So I was actually talking because Aftershock is going in some variation to pre-nats 1, and we were kind of thinking like, is it even like worth going if it's not going to be on Helios 2? Even if the arena stays the same, like the way you crack a base, the way you have to set up your defenses and stuff, it's going to be different. We ended up going because we're bloody degenerates and we don't do anything except play laser tag. But I think there's a world where going down to just 2 pre-nats is, the 2 pre-nats you get are probably going to be more relevant to what nationals is actually like. But then also, it, like Nickel was saying, like, you might be able to pay, especially if it's like that New South Wales group, those guys will be able to go to 2 tournaments financially when normally they'd only be able to go to 1. So yeah,
it makes so much sense that there's invitational tournaments happening at Canberra or Albury for me. Like, they're just so central to everybody, and it's so cheap to get there. It just gives a huge amount of people from Sydney, New South Wales, South Australia an opportunity, like younger people, an opportunity might not be as financial to get to these tournaments. And then I think on the flip side of the scale, we haven't mentioned this, for all our West Australia watchers though, the idea of state-based comps also opens up the ability for WA to potentially get some players over there and to host some tournaments, because if it's a state-based comp, we can play in whatever system we want, So that potentially, if you've got the right people or person in WA who could get behind running something, they might be able to get some players over from the eastern states for something. I'm not sure we would travel every year, but maybe every second year, even that would, I think there's enough support for the West Australian community in general that people would band together to try and support going over there, so they get to host something, because they haven't been able to obviously host for a long time now.
Yeah. Just going back to the original question for this, and part of our notes from earlier, what competitions do we currently have? So we've got the Rumble, we've got
Well, the Rumble's only been run once, and I haven't organised anything since. Yeah, we've talked about it. We haven't quite been able to get it going. So it's still like waiting. It's like in the pie warmer, ready to go.
So okay, we have maybe the spiritual successor to the Rumble. We have the spiritual successor to my random training nights that I did this year. And I've broadly promised people that I'll do a 2-day comp for people if we do it again. Potentially a Friday, Saturday comp where we're not playing in the morning on Saturday, but we play weight Friday and then weight Saturday. So, which again we can come back to as a side top. How do you manage balancing competitions with your general business? So there's that. There's obviously the Premier League out of both of your states, and whether or not they have an open invitation for a 1 or 2 day event. Do we know of any other ones? I know obviously Werribee used to have some, and obviously, are there any sites that we can think of that we think might put up there? Obviously, pre-nats at whatever site is currently pre-nats. There's invitational, for New Zealand. So that's once a year, I believe.
The only ones I could think of for those ones is it's basically got New Zealand, who's currently running stuff regularly, and then you've got kind of Rumble ? Because it hasn't been run. You've got anything that you do ? We haven't been done any. Oh, you've just done the one, and then we've got the currently 3 pre-nats and 1 Zeltac event. So when I was looking at this, I was like, what? Because you're not going to get everybody to every site, every invitational event, are you? You could probably rely on people going to Nats and maybe going to one. They might go to maybe 1 pre-nats and 1 invitational or something like that. It's probably going to be like the average Joe Blow, right? So it's impossible to know the answer to the question, but what's saturation point? But if you take Christmas, you take 1 month out for Christmas, 1 month out for Zeltac, you're essentially left with, if you did something every 2 months, you got maybe 5 events you could probably handle.
Yeah. Incidentally, if people want to come for a 2-day comp or even a 3-day comp between the 22nd of December and about the 14th of January, I'll host it in a heartbeat because I close my site for that time.
Oh, what time's that, sorry?
22nd of December, roughly, to about the 14th of January. My site's closed. We don't open over Christmas. So we legitimately could run a competition, and I have enough staff who are players as well. If I'm not, this year's going to be rubbish for me. I'm going to have a small child, but we could theoretically,
it won't be rubbish.
we could theoretically run something at Christmas because our site's not open. And we've beat around the bush around this one, but as site ops, we need to work out when you can run it, which is quiet for business and things like that. If people would travel at Christmas, and I know it's a big ask, right? We could run one. Canberra could run one over Christmas at some point. But I do have a question for you guys. You guys have been playing more recently than I have. Obviously, I've taken some time off. How many teams do you need to have at one of these sort of comps to make it worth your while? Because I think that's something we haven't talked about here. We've got, maybe half a dozen events potentially in the pipeline between a couple out of my site, a couple out of Queensland, maybe 1 out of SA, 1 or 2 in New Zealand, outside of Zeltac's cohort. But how many teams do you guys think you need at one of these sites to make it worthwhile to travel? Because that's what we're going to have to do for these sort of competitions. We have to sell them to a player base, and ironically enough, we're going to have to kind of sell it to them by going, hey, there's going to be at least X number of teams. It's going to be awesome. Let's come along.
It's a good question. I'll go. Yeah, it's a very good question. You'd probably want to have, I think it depends. So if you have a really good field, like you're going to get top quality teams there, you could probably get away with having less teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So especially if it's like on a format that they really want to play. So for example, okay, we're playing Worlds format. we know there's going to be 5 or 6 of the top 10 there. Okay, we don't care if there's 7 teams there. We're going, kind of thing. At that point, though, how profitable is it for the site to run it? That's the next question.
Well, that's
but
what
I think
I'm
it's
asking the question. Yeah.
You're really asking as a side up, not as a player right now.
No, it's a bit of both, genuinely, because once you hit saturation, we have this awkward point where our player base across the country, as it grows, it'll be able to absorb a number of these competitions because you're going to have players that will go to these competitions and not nationals. And hopefully the player base keeps on growing. And as the player base grows, more of these competitions can happen because you can run them regardless, because you'll have a cohort of players that might, do the... Because I want to run a series out of Canberra. I'm giving something away here, but I want to run a series. Perfect would be 5 competitions over the course of the year. You have to get to at least 3 of them. Average points, big prize at the end. You don't have to get to all 5 of them. You only have to get to 3 of them. So it gives you flexibility of when you can come. How cool would it be if you had a cohort of players that didn't do Zeltac necessarily, or they did it once every few years, but they do the state scene. They do the ACT New South Wales series, which is played maybe between 3 or 4 different sites, rotating the site for the competition over the course of the year. And they maybe they play that series and they play Queensland series. But they don't go to Zeltac.
Well, you've brushed on a key advantage that we've missed. That is literally the reason I will probably be playing these kinds of tournaments going forward, and not Zeltac, which is time. Not everybody has 2 weeks to put away each year to go to Zeltac, and if you want to compete, that's what you need to do. You need to put the training in at the start. Plus, you've got to play the 10 days of tournament, and that's just the advantage at this. Doing state-based comps is I can continue to keep my my foot in the scene, but only have to invest 2 to 3 days of my time to play a big comp. So, yeah, I think there'll be totally people that will be... We might actually retain more of our community for longer because I feel like we do lose people to the length of the tournaments. In terms of numbers, so my personal feeling is that based upon the current scenario where typically we got to play in the afternoon or evening because the site op has to run birthday parties all the way up to 3 p.m. and then you might get the site from 4 p.m. to midnight or something like that. And then on Sunday you might get a bit of time and you've got a bit of time on a Friday night. So if that's the scenario we're working within, I strongly feel that we can't go over 15 teams for these kinds of events. It just thins out. Every time we've gone over 15 teams, you just don't get enough games, in my opinion. So that caps the profitability, obviously, for the side op, but it's still profitable to run it at 15 teams. And in terms of the lower end, I think probably 7 or 8 teams is probably what an operator would be hoping. I mean, obviously, it depends on what you're charging per head as well, but to make it worthwhile, the effort of having to organise it all and everything like that, that's probably where the site operator would want their minimum to be.
Holmes, do you want to jump in here? Because I've got a comment as a site op, but do you want to jump in with your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, as a player, I think it's hard to find an ideal number of teams, but I think a minute and a max is good. And I think the max, like Baker was saying, you get to a certain level of teams where the number of teams is just it's too much for the smaller time frame. And I think if you're gonna make the trek to a tournament, you don't want to have to play barely any games, right? So I think 15 is probably not a bad maximum. And then in terms of a minimum, Baker kind of touched on it before, but let's say hypothetical universe. Aftershock is deciding whether they're going to go to this tournament or not, and they see that Catalyst, Vikings, Spartans, 1UP, whatever, name X amount of even if it's only 5 of the top teams that we see at Zoltac, we would 100% go to that because that would be for us that would be an awesome experience. You get to play so many games against all of these high level players that you don't normally get to play with. I would happily go to a tournament, even if it was only 5 teams, including my own, if they were all cream of the crop. But that's just from that's from my perspective. obviously playing against the same teams, you know, could get boring. But I think as a highly competitive player, like there's a lot you can get out of those games and experiences. So
I think no, I think it's right, and I don't think that well, maybe just your opinion there, obviously, and you caveat it with that. I think a lot of players are going to have the same opinion for that, and balancing it. Back of the napkin math on it, though, for any site op, we talk about getting to the team cap, right, and capping off the teams because you don't get enough. Enough games, right? And I completely agree with you, Bootza. Like, absolutely. At some point, though, that team cap actually allows you to basically give up the weekend to the public. If you know you're going to get 15, 18 teams, you can give up the Saturday. My site does well, and like we book birthday parties out. You know, it's back half of the year, like 8 weeks in advance. We'll book an entire weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I know mine's a little bit more unusual than some, but I think part of it's a logistical element. If I know I'm going to get 15, 18 teams, I'll can a weekend within reason. I'm happy to do it. But again, it's very hard, right? Because for a site op, especially a non-player site op, who the business is there as a business, selling that to them is going to be really difficult. I fully understand that for those players who come from a site or a player base where it's a business first and the community is driven, the competitive community is driven by the local player base rather than perhaps the site op in conjunction. But there is that math there. If we can get enough teams to these events, you can actually start to possibly cut into the standard birthday parties. But the flip side to that is you need it to know in advance that you're going to get those sort of player numbers. Chicken and egg. Someone has to give first, I guess. That's what's up. I'm looking at you as a side up, looking at myself, because it's going to be people like us who potentially can do it. To try and prove a point. So
I think
not forget philosophical.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. It's like we didn't. When we first started Zeltac, it was a 5-day tournament. It ran Monday to Friday because nobody was going to give up a weekend. The first person who gave up a weekend, which might have been 2001, Ronnie Holm. He might have given up the first weekend. I can't remember who it was exactly, but that was brave work from them. Like the first two Nats were at midnight to dawn hours, I'm pretty sure. So for me, I think I would probably over time, if the tournament proved successful, I would creep into my hours. I wouldn't just go, okay, I'm giving up a Saturday. I'd probably go, oh, last year went really well. All right, I'm willing to offer up a couple more hours on that Saturday kind of thing, and we'll maybe go for 18 teams or something. I don't know, whatever the numbers are. Yeah, but I think, every site is different in the turnover that they have and the requirements and stuff. So that's a tricky one. Yeah, I'm just noticing that we're getting close to time, guys. So I wanted to ask, is there any pertinent points that anybody wanted to bring up before I ask one more question?
Take yourself up.
All right.
Go, Holmes, go. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you. It's all on you.
I just think I'm not sure if we've touched on it, but obviously at Zeltac, it's gotten to the point where it is the only, we've got a handful of, some state-based invitational competitions, but for the most part, it's like Prenets and Zeltac. And what that's meant is that we've had to introduce things like the team cap at nationals. And what that means is also, like, with the scene growing like throughout the country every single year, obviously COVID kind of put a bit of a whoosh on that. But I think all of the scenes in general, even the ones that were struggling the most, are starting to recover. When we start creeping back to that that team cap, there's going to be eventually there's going to be quite a lot of players that simply weren't able to go to nationals because they didn't You know, maybe it's not even like the newer, less experienced players. Maybe it's an experienced player that just wasn't able to make it to any of the state-based qualification competitions or whatever. They're like, maybe they don't meet the attendance requirements of the state-based qualifications for nationals. Like, obviously each of the states regions has their own one, but for one reason or another, as we keep going, we're going to get more and more players wanting to go to nationals that just can't because of the team cap. And I think the state-based competitions will really help fill a void for those players, not only to get their like competitive kick, but also, you know, a big part of these laser sports tournaments in Australia, I mean across the world, is like the social side of it, the camaraderie, like you know, I've got these like amazing friends that I only get to see at nationals, and then suddenly you're not able to qualify for nationals for one reason or another, and you're like, damn, that really sucks. I don't get to see any of my friends. You know, so I think more state-based competitions, and it just like provides an avenue to kind of fill that social and competitive need. But I think, I had a brain. What was I going to say? I'll circle back. But also, it's all gone. Fuck it. Gone. Nico, you go. Circle back to me. You circle back to me in a sec.
I was just going to say, I've got lots of bits and pieces, but I'm happy to answer one. Again, there's no easy answer, I think, is the crux of what we're getting at. And it's going to need, for a lot of places, just like, go, Holmes, go.
All right, cool. Before it's gone, I think also a big thing that culturally will need to change as these state competitions, and if they happen, but I'd like to say when they start happening, a cultural thing that needs to change is the, especially from a competitive aspect, this tournament doesn't really matter. I feel like that for a lot of, especially like the high tier players, they might have like an attitude towards tournaments where it's like, I mean, it's not Zoltac, so like why would I go? Like, what's the point? Where's the no one cares that I won this, you know, little state-based regional invites, right? The only thing that for my legacy as a competitive player is like winning the Zoltac. I think if the state-based competitions can grow to the point where like we're actually getting like, you know, some pretty good lineups going and really good players going, the conversation around those state-based tournaments will change from a competitive aspect in that it'll entice more people to go, because like they want the prestige of like, you know, maybe one day when we have, you know, in the far future, each state has like their invites regional tournament. You want to be the first player to win every single one of them. You know, that's stuff like that.
Perfectly. Almost exactly what I was going to say before you like, I remember, which is great. It's going to come a lot from players to make it work. And Holmes, you kind of just, you nailed it on the head there. I think that players have to treat these competitions when they get offered as legitimate competitions, because the moment you start like delegitimizing them, the moment the communities, if it's a like a local community that's putting on a competition, they will run. They will stop. Why would they put the effort in? Why would they put the money up potentially initially if they have to buy the site out for periods of time, because they're not a site op, right? And for a site op, why would I take time out of my money out of my pocket, quite literally, to do something if no one cares about it? So absolutely, and that's a whole other conversation on, how do you how do we change the player mindset for these things as they come on? But yes, Bootza, you had a couple, one or two last questions. I imagine.
It's a kind of, I guess, more of a discussion point to kind of wrap things up, but it kind of flows on from what you're just talking about in terms of shifting the perception of the state-based comps, because one part of it I feel was just time, because that's what happened with Zeltac. There was, maybe 70 to 80% of people going for fun in the early 2000s and 20 to 30% to go to compete. And over time, that's just shifted to like 20 to 30% going for fun and 70 to 80% going to compete. Or, I don't know what the numbers are, but that's just a very raw scale to sort of demonstrate a point that we're much more competitive on average than we used to. And there's a lot more credibility with the tournament than there was in the early days, and that came from time, just each year everybody rocking up and it getting harder and harder and harder. And then of course the other part of that is like who's running these tournaments that we're talking about, because the quality of how well the tournament is run is also goes a long way into the credibility of the tournament, essentially. And I guess, because there's a whole bunch of options. I mean, site operators can run these, like this is a state-based comp. There's like literally these just ideas that we're throwing around. So we could have state-based organisations running them. We could have site operators running them. We could just have a band of misfits running them. Do you guys have anything to say on this kind of topic or area?
Go Holmes.
You want band of misfits, don't you, Nickel?
Oh, no. I have a very strong opinion on this one, but that's okay. Go Holmes.
Good.
I think obviously a lot of what makes I guess not a lot, but Zoltak has all of these things like code of conducts, constitutions, and just like maybe when you come play this tournament, don't be an asshole, right? And I think that the state-based associations can really help out in organizing these tournaments, and also they can. I'm pretty sure it was a Zoltak requirement that each of the regional committees needs to have their own code of conduct, and maybe not a constitution, but like code of conduct and something along those lines, some documentation that you could then, if we kind of want to follow the formula of Zoltak in terms of like an organizational and like the background documentation, all of that, it makes sense for a state-based organization like Salsa, like SEQLTA. Those are the ones that came to my head. I can't think of the other acronyms, but yeah, that's what I think. And then also, obviously, the people on these that run these regional committees are generally going to be some of the players from those local scenes that have been around for a lot longer. I know in the case of Salsa, we've had Katie, the Adelaide side op, has been on the committee for quite a few years now. So it makes it really easy to like liaise with her. And then it's also, I think also from, you guys could probably speak to it a bit more, but from the perspective of a side op, if you go have this state-based association and they go, hey, here's this tournament we would like to run. It's going to make you money. Here's the evidence that it's going to make you money. Look at all of these tournaments. We're going to be running very similarly to how this is. We'd love to work with you to make it happen. We'll provide the volunteer staff to actually run the things. All you need is like maybe one person behind the till to, take orders and drinks or whatever. I think that's my thoughts on the direction it should go. But what's Nicole's thoughts?
Bootza, you look like you're about to talk. Go on. Did you have something in response to that one? Because you've got both.
So I'm not sure if you guys just checked the...
You go.
Well, sorry, I'm not sure if you just checked the chat, but I just sent a message in the chat saying, I cannot hear Combs right now, so please tell me when he's done. So currently, I have 3 blinking dots on the screen, which is Holmes, and no audio, so I have no idea what he just said. So sounds like I had something to say to it, though.
I'm going to paraphrase Holmes, but it had a lot to do with the state-based committees and things potentially taking pages out of Zoltak's book. And Zoltak has actually, and I'm going to add to this, Zoltak has offered their own code of conduct and things as basically a template out, which means they are helping. And this is really cool that they're helping, because for those states that have really engaged committees or organizations, and especially when paired potentially with non-player site ops, they're going to be the driving force of it. And, they're going to potentially be able to, take use cases from other states and go to their site op and go, hey, this will make you money. We'll do the work. and things like that. And that, I feel like for a lot of places that's going to need to happen. And it's going to be a big part of moving this forward. The flip side to that, and I think to Holmes' point, is like if you don't have an engaged site-op, that's the way it has to happen, which means you have to get this groundswell from the community. And to do that, Zeltac is perfectly placed to help provide it because they've got a decade worth of experience in running that. There is obviously limitation to that, and I don't want to sort of like pish-posh the committees and things like that because they do amazing things, even my own one, which is very, very sort of vague. I like the fact that Katie's on your committee, Holmes. I'm not allowed on mine. It's in the constitution that the site-op's not allowed on the committee. So there you go. I think that was an old Zeltac code, so actually, once upon a time. It was to try and distance site-ops from the state-based committees, from moving teams and things like that and committees. But I think there is something to be said about site-ops being able to just enforce competitions and change, and we don't have death by committee, for instance. It's a double-edged sword because, if a site-op goes, I really like one shot every 2 seconds, and everyone goes, that's a stupid idea, Nick. And I go, but I really like it. I'm going to run a competition on it. And no one turns up. Well, that's on me. Right? But I think there's a balancing act there for site-ops as well to be kind of lean in and kind of be my words have gone. My God, I've done a Holmes. Oh no! Be basically the lovely dictator that we can. The best form of government is a dictator. Is a benevolent dictatorship. That's the word. Benevolent. It's the best form of government.
Good recovery, mate. Good recovery.
But two controversial things that I think need to happen. Bootza, Holmes, argue with me, or we can leave this for the next conversation. And anybody in the chat, jump in, have this as the conversation in the chat. Non-player paid refs and prize money.
Woo!
Those are the two things that we haven't talked about when it comes to the future of this sport. Is starting to treat it in a couple of areas more like other sports. And I don't mean like big prize money. It could be just effectively paying for your registration for the competition for that one. So effectively you get your registration back. But non-player paid refs, and it's hard. It's really hard. It's a weird sport. How do you get non-player refs that are theoretically unbiased? And the cost involved, especially for larger tournaments. We did some back of the napkin math for Nats, how much it would cost non-player refs to ref Nat, like Zeltac, and we came up with about $18,000. Which basically, effectively, I'm trying to remember the numbers, it effectively amounted to about $300 extra per player for the registration. You'd have a full team of non-player refs. If you could pull the numbers. But things like that, treating it more like a sport, and that's probably the big thing that us as a community in a sport, we shy away from that conversation. And I think at some point soon, we need to start having that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely an enormous conversation we can have in terms of like what the future, we've talked about what the future of state-based comps could look like and how that could potentially affect the sport. But I think just the conversation of what does the future of the sport look like in terms of putting it on the same level as traditional sports, that's definitely a whole nother podcast. But I was actually during when we were talking about trying to get players to these state-based tournaments and the advantage that these state-based tournaments would have in being able to do trial things is prize pool money. Obviously, I'm no businessman. I don't know how that looks, but yeah, I think being able to put prize money on the table. I mean, if that doesn't incentivize getting some good bully players at your tournament, I don't know what would. I think also just like the opportunity to, even if it is just to it just pays off your registration fee or something. Something, you know, it can start off relatively small. Obviously, money doesn't come out of anywhere, but the opportunity to go to a tournament and like kind of compete to be able to have gone to this tournament for free is pretty cool. I think one of the limiting factors for our sport is just the obviously a lot of the time money will come from like sponsorship deals and stuff like that. You know, like I think Monster is sponsored, like sponsors like every single sport ever in the world. Anytime I've watched any sport, there's a Monster logo somewhere. So, but the difficulty we have with our sport is that it's not currently in its current form spectatorable. Obviously, we've been making leaps and bounds with the stream every single year. It's getting better and better and better. But the reality is, in a sport where we have 15 focal points in an arena that's different every time, with a bajillion walls in the way, where it's really dark and you can barely see anything without super expensive cameras, and we're wearing vests on top of any jerseys we have, right? It becomes very difficult to kind of incentivize any kind of sponsorship. So, you know, that's again a whole nother can of worms on how the sport potentially has to transition to be able to actually get real good money into the sport. But yeah, I think, and then also like you were saying, like those sponsorships could then pay for non-player refs and that kind of stuff. But yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Sponsorship is absolutely another point to go down on another call when we've got some more time, and it will take someone to make the leap and do that. And it's all time. It's time and opportunity. Bootza.
I can't wait to rewatch this podcast because I'm just going to learn a whole bunch of new things from the last 5 minutes that I haven't experienced. I'm going to just assume that they were all magnificent points that were made, and unfortunately, I can't comment on them. But it does sound like there's some very interesting topics. I definitely want to discuss this paying referees thing. I actually thought about at the Rumble another approach you could take is actually to have increased fees for people who don't want to volunteer. So you just say, you don't want to volunteer? Cool. That's your registration fee there. And anybody else wants to pay this fee, then you've got to volunteer. And with that money, extra money, you can pay referees and things like that. Having said that, at this point, I think we're at a level where we could probably have paid amateur referees, probably not at a point where we could have paid professional referees right at this very moment. But that can change. You know, that can change. And just to wrap up the whole who's going to run these tournaments discussion, after thinking about this for a while, I kind of got to a point where it's basically whoever the right people available, essentially, whether that's association people. I know for here in Queensland that we have a group of players that I think could run a tournament here, not necessarily on our committee though, but within our community we do. And if the right group of people came together to say, yep, we'll run it, then I would put my vote behind that to go, okay, well, I'm going to, you know, I'd have to get my business partner's permission as well, of course. But, you know, you can have our site to run a tournament at. Or if it was an individual that had a lot of experience, I would be just as happy to put my name behind them. So for me, it's really just about the right people doing it, because I don't think at the moment we have a luxury of no state has like a perfect system, you know, like I think it would have to vary so much depending on each region's situation and who's their side op and what players they have available and which players are willing to come in from out of state and help and all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's really about when you put the pitch out, okay, we've got a tournament coming up in November next year. This is what format we're playing. And then that little section that says the event organisers are, you know, having that appropriately filled out with the right names will support getting people to the tournament. I think it's probably my final position on that at this stage. But yeah, that's just for where we're at now, essentially. Okay, guys, an hour and 20 minutes. That's pretty good discussion on state-based comps, I think. Yeah, is there any final comments before we wrap it up today?
No, I got nothing.
The only thing I would say is for those that watch this podcast and have thoughts, don't keep them to yourself. reach out to your association if you think it's receptive to it. Your CITOP if you think they might be receptive to it. And if you don't have someone where you think your scene might be a little bit on the smaller side, reach out. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to volunteer.
Reach out to us.
Reach out to us. I'm always happy to hear it. I really am. So, yeah, that's probably the only last comment I'd like to make on it. Talk to us. Get the community chatting.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't help you, we'll be able to point you in the direction of the people that can, and we'll help you in whatever way we can as well. So, yeah, there's people out there that have the experience and are more than happy to share it. So, Nickel, as always, absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. I really appreciate it. Holmes, I'm just going to assume you're smiling at me on the other side of the internet over there.
Sure am.
And no doubt we'll check in again soon. Thanks so much for jumping on. And thank you to all the watchers and listeners out there for tuning in again. We hope it's been a informative topic. And if there's any other topics you'd like us to have a chin wag or a discussion about, please comment in. And please comment in if you've got any thoughts or ideas around this topic of discussion as well, because this won't be the last time we discuss it, and we'd love to hear your ideas. Alrighty, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.